Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. We're really excited to talk with you today about interviewing and more specifically, how to find the best fit for your position. My name is Becky Siekmeier, and I'm the director of the SciTech internship program. SciTech connects college students in STEM majors with internships in small Minnesota companies. In addition to helping employers find great talent, SciTech provides a reimbursement that covers 50% of an intern's wages up to $2,500. SciTech is a state-funded program and it's free for both students and employers. You can learn more on our website, scitechmn.org. My co-host today is Carole Burton of Radiance Resources. Carole, thanks so much for joining me again. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Radiance Resources?
Thank you, Becky. Well, Radiance Resources helps managers systematize their processes. We strengthen strategic planning and cost effectiveness areas by applying simple goals and adaptive leadership skills. We also focus on reaching our client's mission. By doing so, we then advance your leader's growth. For more information, visit our website, radianceresources.org.
Very good. Thank you so much. All right, everybody, here's where you get to get engaged. We'd really love to know who's with us today. So we're going to take a few seconds for a poll. Our question is, which of these titles best describes your role in your organization? Are you at the C-suite level, CEO, CFO, comptroller? Are you admin support, maybe human resources personnel, a hiring manager, or something else? We'll keep the poll open just for about 10 seconds, so please respond now. And hopefully you can all see the poll, so go ahead and respond. All right, I think we're probably good. Let's go ahead and close the poll and we'll share the results. All right, oh, it's pretty evenly spread. Looks like our biggest section is actually the other category, which is fascinating. I wish we had a fill in the blank box so we would know what other was. But anyway, all right, thanks for playing along and for taking that poll. Let's talk about interviewing. It might be tempting to see interviewing as kind of a necessary evil and lose sight of it being an activity that will lead to your company's success. Do you believe that it's the candidate's job to impress you? While the candidate certainly owns their portion of the interview, the importance of making a good impression goes both ways. It's always true, but in a tight labor market, it's especially important to have this perspective. Candidates have other options, and it's your job to put your company in the best light possible, starting with the day the candidate begins interacting with your company. What is the real purpose of an interview? It's much more than just filling your opening. As you're well aware, it's costly for your company to make a bad hire in time, productivity, and dollars. The true purpose of the interview is to answer the question, are we a match, and find the best fit for your position. Finding the best fit is important for you and the candidate for long-term success. We're going to cover a lot of ground today and focus mostly on in-person interviews. However, we'll be touching on all of the following topics: the selection process, phone and video interviews, things remarkable interviewers always do, questions, what to ask and what not to ask, and we'll provide some tips to strengthen your skills. Carole, let's start at the beginning with the candidate selection process.
Sounds great. Now that you've gathered applicants through your outstanding job description that you wrote based on our last webinar, it's now time to start looking at your candidates. Specifically, we want to touch on being conscious of bias in the process. The three common biases to be aware of are attention bias, which is ignoring relevant experience because of how it's framed. It's essentially a failure to consider other responsibilities. For example, the title is different, the industry may have been different, but the experience is relevant. Next is association bias, where the reviewer identifies with the perceived gender, race, or ethnicity of the applicant. Cover up the applicant's name before reviewing the resume. Third is affinity bias. For example, the reviewer identifies with the college, previous employer, or geographical origins, and that slants the favorability of the applicant or the inverse. So to build your company's recruiting toolkit, we recommend keeping a list of the 10 most essential qualifications necessary to keep you determined to the actual qualifications that best match the position. Ideally, you want qualifications to focus on needed skills, traits, and behaviors required for employee success. We're going to show you in a minute how to create a template for this, so stay tuned. Things like a misplaced comma are not the best indicators of employee success. If an employee's resume is eliminated because of a misplaced comma, you may be dismissing someone who could be a valuable asset to the team, bringing in some different perspectives and experiences. If your company uses an applicant tracking system, or ATS, to weed out candidates, make sure you and the recruiting team are well trained. With more than 40% of companies using an ATS to streamline recruiting processes, be aware that these systems can filter out candidates who may be an excellent fit for your position because one, the candidate did not use the same keywords on their resume as you did in the job description, or second, they did not provide information that best describes their skills. As guardrails, the ATS systems may also generate discrimination issues with the Equal Employment Opportunity Law compliance. If you use an ATS software, periodically review your system. Look at who is being rejected, why, and check to see if the exclusion is legitimate and non-discriminatory. Finally, if you haven't already, consider switching to a flexible hiring software that will allow you to integrate multiple tools for resume selection. This way, you have more control of adhering over your company's standard practices. So to begin the selection process, create a standardized template that increases consistency. Using a template provides focus by reviewing what the candidate has accomplished and what they offer that goes beyond the candidate's name, degree, or certification. Create a standard set of attributes that include essential skills, abilities, and knowledge, and overall experience. These attributes should correlate to your company's mission, values, and strategy. They will help you select candidates as you review resume profiles. These factors can become clarification questions asked during the phone or video interview. So we wanted to provide you with a complete line of thinking throughout the process. Here is a basic template format that you can use. Check out the handout called Selection Criteria Template in the Handouts section of the control panel. Here are some ideas for areas you may want to include on the template. Leadership skills, teamwork and collaboration, problem-solving skills, work ethic, flexibility or adaptability, interpersonal skills, creativity, time management, communication, analytical skills, or software skills. Next, use your template to review the resume packet and complete the scoring. Determine if the application was completed and that all documents were submitted. Review the resume and cover letter. This includes understanding the candidate's job history. For interns, look at on-campus work study, part-time jobs, engagement in student clubs, volunteering, or similar activities. Identify employment gaps. Note, this is more important for permanent full-time positions versus internships. Make a list of the candidate's accomplishments, and again, note their software skills. And finally, consider conducting additional research beyond the application packet, depending on your approach. Some employers conduct a Google search and social media check that may help you weed out candidates who don't align with your company values, such as posts with hate speech or promoting criminal activity. Be careful with an online search, as you may see things you don't want to be influenced by, such as gender, race, religion, family status, etc. Screening candidates' social media accounts may raise legal issues. An excellent practice to deter unwanted risks is to document a consistent policy for this type of research that identifies your objectives in this process. By doing so, you'll reduce the possibility of bias or discrimination throughout your organization if multiple people are involved in the selection process. We've included a resource for developing a social media research policy that can be found on the webinar handout. The steps we are presenting may seem time-consuming, but time and resources at this stage prevent unforeseen issues that may arise in the future.
This is great information, Carole. We could do a whole webinar just on candidate selection. Let's take a breather for a quick audience poll. All right, so the question we have for you is, how much effort do you invest in vetting candidates before your first verbal interaction? Do you only look at the resume and cover letter? Do you look at the resume, cover letter, and do a Google search? Or do you go all out and look at the resume, cover letter, a Google search, and a social media review at this stage? So we're going to leave the poll open here for just about 10 seconds. We don't want to take up too much time here, but let us know. Are you kind of doing the basics, resume and cover letter, and a Google search, or all of the above in addition to a social media review? All right, we'll leave it open here for just another second. And all right, why don't we go ahead and look at the results? Oh, interesting. Okay, so most of you are going for the first option of just looking at the resume and cover letter, and I assume not wanting to be influenced by social media and a Google search. A few of you said the middle option, and then maybe about a third of you said looking at doing the full search, including a social media search. So that's interesting. We're kind of in the camp of doing options 1 or 2.
Correct.
All right. Now let's move to the next step, which is your first personal contact with the candidates. And this would be during a phone or video interview.
So after you have selected candidates to interview, here are a few best practices as you prepare and conduct your first live contact. Review the type of open-ended questions that expand what you have learned about the candidate before making initial connection. As a general practice, these questions should be part of the standard questions as you talk to candidates. So for example, why are you interested in the role? Why are you interested in being part of this company? What is your ideal work environment? What was the most significant problem you solved? And finally, what is your greatest accomplishment? Also, there may be a couple of specific questions you may ask related to your findings that apply to the job posting. Determine the length of time for the call or video. In general, this touch point lasts about 30 minutes or less. Prepare what you are going to say, as you want to make an excellent first impression. After completing your preparation for this contact, reach out to the candidates to provide instructions for the phone or video interview. Whatever method you use to provide this information, you want the invitation to be as welcoming and in alignment with your company values. Identify who you are, your role, and the purpose of the communication. Then indicate how they need to prepare for the phone or video interview, including the purpose and length of time. Let them know what to expect and how to pronounce their name phonetically and what they prefer to be called. Upon the candidate's response, confirm the best time and date for the screener and candidate. If this is a video interview, make sure the internet connection is functional. Use platforms that are easy and accessible, but high quality. For example, Zoom, GoToMeeting, and WebEx are top quality and accessible services. Last, make sure to wear proper attire for a video interview. You may want to consider adding these same suggestions when preparing the candidate as well. For this initial touch point, the interviewer should be in a quiet place and remove distractions. When contact is made, make sure to ask the candidate, is this still a good time to talk?
I have a funny story actually about a phone interview. A friend of mine who was a recruiter told me about a time when she got a big surprise at the beginning of the phone interview. She had scheduled a 1 o'clock appointment with a candidate, and when she called, she said who she was and asked if this was still a good time to talk. And he said, yeah, hang on a second. And then she heard the sound of a toilet flushing.
Oh my God.
So you never know what you're going to get, but it's still important to ask if it is still a good time to talk.
Indeed. At the end of the conversation, provide the next steps to the candidate. You can say, we'll be in touch if the candidate is moving forward, or schedule an in-person interview. So let's move on to our next topic, things remarkable interviewers do.
Interviews are a professional discussion where both a candidate and the interviewer focus their attention on sharing and requesting information to identify whether they are a match. There are tons of articles available on how to be a good interviewer. In this section, we'll share the most consistent recommendations we found and a few others you may not have considered. You're probably already doing many of these things, but a refresher is always helpful too. Start with determining your real business need. When your company has an opening, you're not simply hiring a position, you're hiring a result. What does the person in this role need to accomplish while they're with you? Outline the basic goals and desired outcomes, even if it's just for an internship. Again, ensure every candidate will be at their best. Tell the candidate what to expect for the interview. They should know when to arrive and where you're located, where to park, what train or bus route is nearby, and where to go once they arrive at your building. They should also be aware of who will be conducting the interview. Is it a group interview? How long should they expect the interview to last? Let them know so they can prepare accordingly and avoid using surprises or uncertainties. And always remember the 8 B's.
The 8 B's? So what are those?
Okay, I kind of made it up, but still. The 8 B's are a great guide to interviewing basics, such as be well prepared. Get to know your candidate before the interview by reviewing the information the candidate has already provided. It will make it much easier for you to ask intelligent questions and lead a good conversation. If the candidate submitted a cover letter, reread it right before the interview. A good cover letter is a gold mine of information. Thoroughly review the person's resume and bring copies of the resume and cover letter to the interview. Understand what they've accomplished, what kind of projects they've worked on, what their skills are, and also get a feel for their interests and goals. Begin putting questions together about promotions they've had or an increase in responsibility. Determine what you want to clarify. Be punctual. Greet candidates on time and make them feel welcome. Be kind. It will help nervous candidates relax. Be respectful. Ask again how to pronounce the candidate's name if you're unsure. Be a good timekeeper. You want to respect their time as well as your own. Be consistent. Follow a well-structured format. This will help you stay on time and gives all candidates a fair chance. Unstructured interviews can easily become subjective and wander into non-job related territory. Be an accurate note taker. It will help you keep track of how the candidate performed, what they said, and allow you to compare candidates later. Really listen to what the candidate says. Write down what they say, not just what you think about what they said. So for example, you would write down, she told us she hasn't dealt with difficult customers before versus she's inexperienced. Be positive about the company and the role the candidate is seeking. Give an overview of the position, describe the main goals for the role and what your company hopes to achieve through this position. It's your responsibility to sell the job and the company to the candidate. At the heart of a good interview is to make sure that it's a conversation and not an interrogation. It's hard to have a conversation with someone you hardly know, but you can and should set the stage for success. And a stressed candidate won't be able to show you their best, which will make it difficult for you to make an informed decision. Carole, I love this cartoon. Can you imagine walking into this kind of a situation?
Absolutely. I've kind of felt like I've been in there in this situation before. You know, you want to put the candidate at ease to ensure that your organization is well positioned and the candidate has a great experience. Here's some examples to help candidates relax. Create a clean space with no distractions where there are no barriers between you and the candidate, such as a computer. Uncross your arms and legs. Feel free to talk with your hands every so often as you would when you have regular conversations. Reveal the palms of your hands. Lean towards the candidate. Maintain eye contact without staring them down. Smile. Be genuinely interested and engage in the conversation as you have an opportunity to learn about the candidate's story and experience. Here are some other things that can help get candidates to relax. Start with a hello, being welcome and engaging. Remember, you want the candidate to like you too. Offer something to drink. Even if they say no, have it handy. Most candidates are nervous and may develop a cottonmouth. Start the interview by introducing yourself and fellow interviewers. Describe your role. Give a brief overview of the company and share why you are hiring. Provide business cards at the start of the interview. This will give the candidate time to get settled. We've talked about the importance of proper preparation and creating a list of questions. Create questions that allow the candidate to be reflective, which will lead to more insightful answers. Create an atmosphere that eliminates distractions for you and the candidate, like pinging emails, text messages, or incoming phone calls. Let the candidate know that you will be taking notes, and if they are comfortable and prepared, have them do the same. We located this resource that provides another scorecard, this time for use during the face-to-face interview. You can use this format to remain focused, fair, and consistent. Bring shy candidates out of their shell. For most people, interviewing is about as much fun as public speaking. Candidates are often anxious or nervous and may not make a good first impression. However, this doesn't mean they wouldn't excel at their job. Try complimenting them on a few accomplishments or things you appreciated on their resume. Give people time to respond. By pausing, you give the candidate more room to reveal themselves and share additional information beyond a canned response. Have a two-way conversation. Ask follow-up questions and encourage candidates to ask questions throughout the interview. This will make the interview feel more like you're leading a discussion and not cross-examining them. And finally, never, ever, ever take over. The interviewer should not be the one doing all of the talking. You don't want to give a late night monologue. You will learn the most about the candidate if they do 90% of the talking. Always ask what questions they have for you. Give honest and direct answers. Don't use internal acronyms and internal company speak. Tell the candidate what comes next in detail. Explain your selection process and what your timeline looks like. After the interview, if you determine the candidate is not a good fit for the position, Follow up and provide them with closure. Leaving someone hanging will likely lead to them talk about you and your company, and it won't be in a flattering way. Providing closure isn't only good business, it's really the right thing to do.
That was a lot of information, Carole. Let's take a quick break here and check in with our audience. What questions do you have for us? There's a little box on your control panel for questions. And while you're thinking about your questions for us, we have some questions for you, or one question for you anyway. And that is, what are some of your best interviewing practices? Type your comments into the questions box, and we'll kind of do a two-way conversation here. We'll practice what we preach. So you can enter your questions or answer our question. What are your best practices for interviewing? What haven't we covered that you think is a good idea? So we'll give people time to respond, right? Because that's what we're supposed to do, is pause, give them time to respond.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, at any time you can type your questions into that box. It looks like we have one, but I can't actually read what it says. Is there one there? Yeah.
Always tour the production and office area.
Ah, yes, that's a good practice. So someone said, give a tour of the office and production area. That's especially true for manufacturers and people who have something beyond just an office area. Yeah, good point. Thanks for sharing that. All right, well, we'll move on here. One thing that I did want people to know is that in that same control panel, you should see something that says handouts. And in there, you'll see 3 different handouts. There's one that has the selection template that Carole talked about earlier. There's a flyer for the SciTech internship program. And we've also created a handout called SciTech Handout Pro Interviewing Webinar 2020. In that document, you're going to find all of the resources that we used to create this webinar. So there's links to everything. So go ahead and check that out. Hopefully you can get to it. All right, let's move on to our next segment, which is we're going to talk about what kinds of questions to ask and which ones to avoid.
So during the interview itself, we've identified a few best practices. Ask open-ended, relevant, and non-discriminatory questions. Create a list that is tailored to the role you are hiring for, such as asking about skills, job or industry knowledge, and work history. That way, you'll be consistent with all candidates. And on a related note, talk specifics. Candidates will open up more when you discuss specific job functions from current or previous roles, schools, projects, etc. Develop questions about accomplishments on their resume. Ask behavioral questions. So instead of asking, what would you do if so happened, use this format instead. Tell me about a time when, and then fill in the blank. The candidate's answers will tell you what someone actually did, not what they might or could do. You'll gain insight on their conflict resolution skills, their flexibility to shift gears, their problem-solving abilities, and so on. Pay attention to the tone that they use when describing the role of others involved in the situation. By asking behavioral questions, this really becomes a great tool to counter unconscious bias. Have a goal for what you want to learn or achieve with each question. Use questions to learn about the candidate's skills, what motivates them, and to assess whether this person is a good fit for the role and your organization. Keep questions clear and concise. Nothing stresses a candidate out more than pure confusion. If the candidate keeps asking you to repeat the question, that will be a big clue to you to simplify and slow down. The interviewer should be aware of the natural impulse to connect with or dismiss a candidate based on a reaction to them personally. Affinity bias naturally inclines people to connect with others with whom they have things in common. However, affinity does not necessarily yield the best candidates. To determine your own unconscious bias, take the Harvard Implicit Association Test. We have this link on the resources handout, or you can Google it. So let's take a look at some examples of great questions. First, what do you do about your company? Excuse me, what do you know about your company? And why do you want to work here? With information available in a quick Google search and on LinkedIn, there's no excuse for a candidate not to have some idea of what your company does. You will be able to quickly determine who is really interested in working for you by how much research they did before the interview. Second question, what skills and strengths can you bring to this position? Did the candidate review the job description carefully to see what qualifications were listed? You'll find out quickly if they did, and learn a great deal about how they see themselves in the position. Third, please tell me about your current or most recent job. This question will help you evaluate the candidate's communication skills, and ideally you'll gain insight into what kind of work they perform beyond what is included on their resume. For interns, if they haven't had a real job yet, ask about student clubs, volunteering, etc. Fourth, tell me about a time when you had a disagreement with a boss or colleague, and how did you handle the situation? Fifth, tell me about a time when someone changed your priorities unexpectedly. What was the situation, and how did you manage it? Sixth, next, do you work best alone or on a team? This question helps determine if the candidate is a good fit for the kind of assignments they'll receive. Some positions require people to stay focused on tasks that they don't need a lot of interaction with other people, while other positions require people to collaborate and/or do a lot of multitasking. There's not a right or wrong answer to this question. It simply depends on what the position entails. Seventh, describe your ideal work environment. Eighth, tell me about a challenge you faced. How did you overcome it? Ninth, what is the best team that you've ever been a part of and why? And number 10, what 3 words would you choose to describe yourself?
Here's some great questions for interns. Because they may not have much work experience yet, you want to find out what makes them tick. How are they viewed by others, and how they've taken on leadership roles in different settings. So I've got 10 examples here. The first one is, what has influenced or created motivation in your academic work so far, and how does this internship fit with that? What accomplishments are you most proud of? Why are you interested in this internship, this company, this industry? Why did you choose your major? How would your boss or professors describe you? How would your friends, classmates, or coworkers describe you? What skills or experiences do you hope to gain in this internship? Tell me about a time when you had a group project. Everybody loves those group projects.
Yes, they do.
What was the task? Who was involved? And what challenges did you face? Tell us about an assignment or project from start to finish. What went well, and what would you have done differently? And of course, ask, what questions do you have for me? While having a set of questions you ask each candidate is strongly recommended, you have to know when to go off script with good follow-up questions. These are the questions that will get you past a canned response and into the details you really need to know. After the candidate answers your initial question, pause and then ask how, or why, when, or who did what, or ask, say more about whatever they were just talking about. What were some challenges you faced along the way? What would you do differently and why? If something the candidate says piques your interest, explore the topic further.
Repeatedly, the research we did advised staying away from odd, curveball, or irrelevant questions like, if you were an animal, what would you be and why?
Okay, but just for fun, Carol, which one would you be?
I think in this slide, I think I'd be the mouse, because the mouse gets to go everywhere, learn a lot of things, and always mice are very smart creatures and don't forget anything.
Wow.
And you, which one would you choose, Becky?
Oh, mine are really more at the kind of the basic levels of humanity. I want to be that puppy because he's just so cute. I mean, imagine somebody would be constantly picking you up and hugging you. You'd know that you were like loved by everybody. You get that nice scratch behind the ears,
Yeah.
little belly rub. I mean, life would be good. Think of all the treats you'd get.
That's true. That's a good point. So we advise to stick to questions that are key to learning about the candidate's qualifications for the job. You'll get much more meaningful information from these types of questions. Irrelevant questions can cause a kind of resentment that can destroy a candidate's experience and have long-term implications for your recruiting abilities. By avoiding these kinds of questions, your candidate will actually be more at ease. You'll look more professional, and you will still steer clear of asking a question that could be viewed as offensive, harassment, or discrimination. Speaking of questions you shouldn't ask.
Here we go.
Yep, there are many you should steer clear of entirely. It is not difficult to inadvertently stray off into these subjects when making small talk about getting to know someone. You are bound to see something on a resume or LinkedIn profile that sparks your interest. That's great. For example, the name of a college and say, hey, oh, I went to the U of M too. When did you graduate? Since an interview is not just a casual conversation, you need to find a balance between making your candidate feel comfortable and without getting into restricted areas. In other words, asking illegal questions. In an article titled 35 Questions You Should Never Ask Candidates, the author stated that 20% of hiring managers admit to having asked an illegal interview question at some point in their career life.
Wow.
That's 1 in 5. State and local federal laws, illegally based on specific protected categories such as national origin, citizenship, age, marital status, disabilities, arrest and conviction record, military discharge status, race, gender, or pregnancy status. Any question that asks a candidate to reveal information about such topics without having a job-related basis will violate the various state, local, and federal discrimination laws.
We found a really good article that had kind of a nice chart that showed the what not to ask and what to ask instead.
Yep.
And so we're going to just go through a couple of the ones that I think maybe are most relevant. So on the topic of age, don't ask, when did you graduate from high school? What class were you in? Are you comfortable around younger or older employees? Can you rent a car? Do you think your age has ever held you back? When are you thinking of retiring?
Yeah.
How old are you? Don't ask those questions. Instead, it's okay to say, are you 18 or older? Or 21 or older if that's relevant to the job? Or ask, what are your career goals?
With regards to nationality or ethnicity, it's really not good to ask, are you a US citizen? How long have you lived here? Where are you or is your where your family are from? What color is your hair or your eyes? What country you're from? Where are you originally from? I've had that asked.
Mm-hmm.
What's your ethnicity? Where were you born? I've had that asked. What languages do you speak? Instead, you can ask, are you authorized to work in this country? Or are you legally eligible to work in the United States? Can you show proof of citizenship, visa, alien registration if we decide to hire you?
And finally, we're going to talk about arrest and conviction questions. Do not ask, have you ever been arrested? And don't ask questions about convictions for roles that are not security sensitive or ask about convictions that have no connection to the role. That'd be like asking a receptionist if she had any speeding tickets or convictions. Be careful. Avoid this question altogether if it's not directly related to the job or in states where it's illegal to ask. If you really must know, it may be okay to ask, have you ever been convicted of a crime?
We also located examples of other questions that you shouldn't ask. For example, what is your childcare arrangement? How far is your commute? How often did you take sick days at your last position? Do you socially drink or smoke? How tall are you? How much do you weigh? Do you own or rent your home? Financial status questions such as, do you have a bank account? Have your wages ever been garnished? Have you ever declared bankruptcy? Avoid all questions about non-professional organizations that could be seen as a proxy question about race, age, sex, and others.
All right, we're going to take another quick break here for you, give you a chance to ask some questions. And while you're thinking about your questions, we also have a question for you. What would you tell a candidate who volunteered information on one of the topics we've been talking about? And again, you can go ahead and share your thoughts in the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. It sounds like we've got a question.
Sarah asks, can we ask about smoking if it would be a problem for the type of lab work we do?
So again, so can we ask about smoking as it relates to the type of lab work? I guess I'd have to.
I would have, well, if the organization has policies of where people can smoke outside, I guess the question is, I guess for clarity, is the question, can you smoke inside, or are you talking about if they have lighters or things like that, you know, that could trigger fires, like
Yeah.
from a safety perspective?
I guess I'd have to know more about
We would have to
the
know
situation.
exactly.
This person said, she said, we do low-level phosphorus testing that can get contaminated
Yes.
with smokers' clothes.
Got it. So that would be a great policy question with your HR department. And I would think that when during the job description post, that would have to be clarified in that space to make sure.
That applicants knew before they even applied. To
Absolutely.
the job. Okay.
Because of the health and the safety dangers. Yeah.
Wow. Interesting question.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. So getting back to our question for everybody, what would you say to a candidate who volunteered information on one of these topics? I've been told to say, what you're sharing right now will not come into consideration in our hiring decision. All right, we're going to move on here. Again, I want to put in a plug to download the handout in the control panel to see all the resources that we used in today's presentation, because we have quite a few.
All right. So
hold on. It sounds like we got another question. Okay.
This is from Lisa. She says, if you are interviewing someone and they keep talking around the questions, is there a good way to help adjust the conversation without being too obvious?
Oh, that's another good question. So if someone is acting like a political candidate and they keep answering a different question than the one you asked, how do you get them to stay on task? Do you move on, or do you just do you try a couple different ways?
I think it's about rephrasing, because they may not be able to hear what the real question is. So I think that for an interviewer, it's rephrasing and asking the question to make sure it hits and gets over there. If not, there may be a blind spot in the candidate's viewpoint of how they're hearing it, what their perception is.
So it may not be intentional.
It may not be intentional.
Okay.
It may not.
That's a great
That's a great question.
Great question and
Yes.
good answer.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to move on to tips on how to strengthen your skills as an interviewer.
Yes. So the first is discover your biases and learn how they work. You know, we all have biases. Do you know what yours are? Biases can affect the way we judge candidates during the hiring process. You may want to consider taking a test, such as the Harvard Implicit Association test. We have a link in the resources handout for this webinar. We also found a great resource called Common Interview Biases, which is also in the resources handout. So think about your unique biases. Personal concerns, preferences, or experience may interfere with your judgment. For example, if you believe overqualified employees will eventually get bored with their job, you may refuse to hire them. However, by doing so, you may miss out on talented people who might still have been valuable team members. Try team interviewing. Ask a coworker to join you. You can share questions or divide the interview into parts. This allows you time to pause, listen, and observe. If you don't already have one, create an interviewing scorecard like we discussed earlier. You may want to consider using your notes to rate all candidates' answers after conducting all interviews instead of right after each interview to avoid the halo effect. The halo effect is when a candidate has one strong answer that overshadows everything else, or they look strong next to a weaker candidate. Take your time. Don't schedule anything directly after the interview. Rushing people out isn't a pleasant way to end an interview and sends a poor message about your company's values. Also, reset the urge and resist the urge to decide on a candidate before the interview ends. Wait until you've met all candidates and consulted your notes and rating scale. Then compare notes with fellow interviewers. Be careful of trusting body language cues.
Sounds like we have another question.
Okay,
All right.
I'll stop.
Judy asks, what do you recommend for letting candidates know they are in the running as a backup while you wait for your favorite candidate to respond to an offer?
So how do you let somebody know who's maybe your second choice? How do you let them know that they're in the running while you're waiting for your favorite candidate?
I think that I've actually experienced that. And I think one is to make sure that as an interviewer, I don't dismiss that possible second person in the moment. They will pick that up as an unconscious movement in the energy. I think that it's a matter of reassuring it's a matter of keeping your mind open, because the person in front of you might be better than who your favorite is. So I think that that's an unconscious bias to consider. In that moment, make sure to tell the candidate, we have other candidates and we're going to assess fully. I think that that's the biggest thing, is to keep yourself, even though you're excited to see that candidate coming, to be present with the current candidate. Because that's not fair.
So what about after offers? Maybe you've put an offer out already to someone, and you either have other candidates who are second and third in line. So what do you tell the people who are second and third in line while you've got the offer out to the first candidate?
I think it's a matter of not having them hang on to that possibility. I think it's being upfront and honest and saying, we're at a point where we've been considering, but we don't want to keep you on the tether. I think that that's not fair emotionally to the other candidates as well.
I think the other thing you could do is you could buy a little time.
Absolutely.
I mean, it depends on, if you're talking it's like a couple weeks after the interview.
Right.
That's different than if it's the next day.
Right.
And you've decided to make an offer to the first person. You can say we're still evaluating our options, and then hopefully the first candidate will get back to you in 1 or 2 days, whatever period you give them to make a decision. I think it kind of depends on the level of the position.
I agree.
And the time frame.
And I think too, you don't want to have anyone hanging out for a long period of time. I think that's very unfair.
Yes, I agree.
And I think the more open you are about that, the more respect you're going to get.
Yeah, I agree.
So even if it's 2 or 3 weeks, tell everyone that and keep it clean for you, because then you can have that candidate really decide and truly make that decision, that primary candidate you want to offer, that you've offered to.
Because I think you generally don't want to know that someone else turned down the job and you're the
Correct.
second choice.
Exactly.
Because you're walking into that new job going,
Yes.
wow, I wasn't your top choice.
Right. And you create that stigma, and then it gets kind of yucky, and then you could step into other areas that you don't want to.
Yep. Sounds like we have another question.
Chuck asks, is there a consensus on generally acceptable duration post-interview when candidates should be notified either way?
Oh, so the question is about what is the ideal length of time to make somebody wait after an interview to get back with them? Well, I think part of it is during the interview, you should be telling them, this is our selection process.
Yes.
This is what the next steps are.
Correct.
We plan to make a decision in the next 3 days, in the next week, in the next 2 weeks, we're evaluating other candidates. I think if you
Agreed.
if you're up front and you say, we plan to make a decision by, or you will hear from me by, you know, I think that's the one thing that you should do for sure. And if you tell them it's going to be 2 weeks, then they should know they're not going to hear from you for 2 weeks.
Right.
When you get to that 2 weeks,
Right.
you want to make sure that you've pretty well made your decision, or you should be sending out an email saying, we're still thinking about it.
Correct.
Or we got additional candidates,
Correct.
or, you know, whatever the situation is. I think the main thing is, like you said before, you just don't want to leave people hanging.
No, you don't. And I think that it's important because, one, it leaves the candidate knowing that there is an end point. It also develops that candidate's emotional tie to the company, because maybe they don't get the offer, but who knows, they could be better positioned because they understand your process to apply for another position. And that way too, and it also, by you creating the timeline, it makes you and the group figure it out.
Yeah, right. And you hold yourself
Accountable, truly.
Right. Yeah. So I think as soon as, if you tell people it's going to be, we're going to decide by next Monday, or whatever, that as soon as you have made a decision and you've gotten the response from your first candidate,
right,
your number one candidate, I think you want to be following up pretty quickly, close it out for you, and give the candidate closure as well.
Exactly. So creating the entire schedule before the interviews even begin will help you with that structure and consistency as well.
Yep. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great questions.
So we were talking about we started to talk about body language.
Yes.
Yeah.
So be careful of trusting body language cues. It is not an exact science and can indicate different things in different cultures. Candidates' body language cannot tell you how a candidate will perform a job, but it can reveal how a candidate is feeling at the moment.
I think it's really important not to read too much into body language. I know someone quite well who is a tall man and did a lot of weightlifting in high school and college, so he has a pretty big build. And he's really self-conscious about his size and not wanting to intimidate people who are shorter than he is. So he has a tendency to stand with his feet at a slight angle away from the person that he's talking to so that he doesn't loom over them. If you didn't know why he does that, you could really misread his body language as wanting to get away from the conversation. So really, I think you should try to avoid making generalized assumptions. Sounds like we have another question.
Great.
Amanda asks, what do you do when you interview people but then decide not to hire for that position? How would you communicate that to the candidate?
So the question is, your company has changed their mind about an opening that you've interviewed for, and now you have to turn around and tell the candidates what the situation is.
I've actually had that experience, and the organization came back and said, we've decided to hold. Sometimes I've had it where they've said, we had funding issues, or we've decided at this time there's other consideration or other positions we need to consider for the budget.
Right. I think that the point is you got to be upfront, and you have to tell them as soon as you find out, so that you let them off the hook to go pursue other things.
Exactly. And here's the thing, that's also a great opportunity to say, we really like you. Here's another position that might work better. Or here's another organization within our industry or someone we know that can help you as well. Let me be that bridge. Again, it's going back to our first webinar when we talked about being in their shoes, seeing it from their side, and creating those deep connections and or networking capabilities,
Yep.
you just never know where you're going to reconnect again.
Yep. I've actually had that happen a couple times with SciTech companies who thought that they were going to hire interns. They had made offers, the interns were all set up. And then as it got closer to summer, they couldn't do the internship for one reason or another.
Yep.
They didn't get a big project. They
Yep.
lost a client, went out of business, something happened, and they could no longer afford to bring that student on board. They actually offered to write recommendation letters for that student to help them try to get a position somewhere else. So I think creating that goodwill
Absolutely.
when things change is really important for your company's reputation and to do the right thing to help that person move forward.
Agreed.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we've pretty well covered the ground on body language and not jumping to conclusions. So really, I guess at this point, what other questions do you have about what we've covered today? We really have, we've been kind of all over the map from selection to phone and video interviews, prepping. There's a lot of preparation work here. I think that's probably the one thing that I learned the most about this topic is when we were doing this research was to really do this well. There's a lot of prep work involved.
Definitely.
All right. Well, we're not seeing any questions come in right now, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. Carole, I want to thank you so much for joining me today and for providing great insight and resources on interviewing. And thanks to all of you for joining us. We have one more webinar in our series, and that one will be about successful onboarding. The date for that webinar is April 16th, same time. Registration is now open, and there will be a link in the follow-up email that you'll receive from this webinar in an email tomorrow. If you're interested in learning more about the SciTech internship program, I've uploaded a flyer that provides general information about the program, and it can be downloaded from the handouts control panel on the right. Flyers are also available. It does look like we have one more question.
Okay.
All right.
So this comes from Wayne, and he asks, how do you tell a coworker that he or she is asking inappropriate questions?
Oh, wow.
That's a good one.
So the question was, how do you tell a coworker that they're asking inappropriate questions? Boy, there's about a million different ways to approach that, but that's a touchy one. I think having your questions established ahead of time is one way to avoid that, and saying these are the questions that we agree to ask. And then maybe you just got to have that hard conversation with them afterward and say, the questions that you're asking are straying into areas that we legally don't want to be going to.
And sometimes you have to stop the interview.
Yeah,
Sometimes you got to stop the interview and literally say, can we take a pause for the cause? And literally walk out, or have the candidate or you all walk out and have that conversation, because the energy in the room has shifted and it's gotten, 9 times out of 10 becomes very intense. And so that may have to occur, to be bluntly honest. And there may be have to in the moment to apologize for the disruption and moved on when you come back into the room.
The other thing you could do is just say to the candidate, I'm sorry, don't answer that question. I think we're kind of straying into some territory that we don't want to go.
Absolutely.
You could say something like that. Okay. All right. Well, if you're interested in learning more about Carole's work, you can go to radianceresources.org. And again, you're going to get an email from us tomorrow with links to all kinds of good stuff. And if you need to get a hold of me, my contact information is on the screen. So have a great day, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us.